an interview, not only talking about new confirmations and new evidence of how the extent to which GMOs are massively damaging the internal organs, the gut flora, and triggering sterility and infertility. You've also got the rise of a new super virus never before seen in science. They say it acts like a fungus. They don't know what it is. It can only be seen under an electron microscope, and yet it's getting into livestock and triggering abortions at a 24-hour time period. No other causes for it, and suddenly livestock are having miscarriages and all the other stuff we mentioned. Is there a connection? We don't know, but let's play that clip now from Jeffrey Smith because it's just bombshell.
But I wanted to talk about a new way, one that some of your listeners might be familiar with. There was a study, a series of analyses done on aborted fetal tissue of livestock where the farmer was beside himself. There was such high rate of abortions, spontaneous abortions. And on the aborted fetal tissue was a new organism only visible with an electron microscope. And they figured out where is this stuff coming from? So they did analysis of the feed. And when the feed was treated with Roundup, either it was Roundup Ready crops or products that had Roundup sprayed, there were high concentrations of this organism and high concentrations on diseased plants that are known to be getting disease because of Roundup.
What is it?
They took this organism and they exposed it to a pregnant chicken. It killed the fetus in 24 to 48 hours. Now, this organism has never been discovered before. It's completely new to science. It's the size of a virus. It operates, it looks like a fungus, and it appears to be everywhere, but in high concentrations around diseased plants and infertile animals and animals that have spontaneous abortions. So a letter was written by a senior researcher, by a professor emeritus, in fact, Professor Dr. Don Huber, who had decades of study and was an expert at Roundup effects. He was also on a military group that evaluates the threats of outbreak of disease, both natural and man-made. And in his letter to Secretary Vilsack of the USDA, he said, this is an emergency. He pointed out that there is widespread infertility among animals, that there might be a human link, of course, and that Vilsack should not approve Roundup Ready alfalfa because that would only increase the exposure of the population to Roundup at a time when we need to put money now into investigating whether this organism is causing the problem and linked to Roundup or GMOs. He sent that letter on January 17th, privately to Secretary Vilsack. It was leaked onto the internet, so that's why I can talk about it. He was finally called weeks later by someone from the USDA. He gave them the names of the researchers, and the researchers have not yet been contacted by the USDA, and that was over a year ago.
Let me stop you.
Turning now to Ron Paul news. He met with Ben Bernanke today at the House Financial Services Committee during his semi-annual visit, and Ron Paul once again grilled Bernanke, the head of the Federal Reserve, asked him about inflation and confronted him, do you buy your own groceries? Do you see the inflation for yourself? The official government statistics show only about 2% inflation. But Ron Paul points out here in the clip we're about to watch that the old CPI, the Consumer Price Index, and how the old way of measuring it shows prices actually going up at 9% inflation rate. But he says whatever percentage you want to agree on, we are losing the value of the dollar, and it's the Federal Reserve's policies that are doing it. And he has a great clip here, but what's not in that clip is we are witnessing today the end stages of a grand experiment, Paul said, adding the Fed's control over the nation's monetary supply has directly caused economic bubbles and all but destroyed the purchasing power of the dollar. And then you turn to Bernanke news from today, also from that same appearance in the House Financial Services Committee, and it's hopeful news about how the S&P is growing, even though he's not signaling for more stimulus. Well, in fact, they're basically doing QE3, whatever they decide to call it publicly, whether they ever admit it. But you see in the reports that were posted on Drudge and other sites how Bernanke dashed hopes for further monetary stimulus, how the market is far from normal, but they hope for increases, but the gas prices will temporarily surge and push up inflation, reducing the consumer's purchasing power, and about how people are upset about the end of free money that's actually helping to further debase our economy. But of course, this is just Bernanke publicly saying he's not going to continue these subsidizing policies, allowing banks to park their money at the Federal Reserve, get interest on them without loaning the money to the actual real economy, to real people. So with those financial issues in focus, we turn now to the clip of Ron Paul confronting Ben Bernanke in the House.
Mr. Bernanke, if you don't mind, would you tell me whether or not you do your own shopping at the grocery store?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so you're aware of the prices. But, you know, this argument that the prices are going up about 2%, nobody believes it. You know, and the old CPI says prices are going up at 9%. They believe this. If people on fixed incomes, they're really hurting. The middle class is really hurting because their inflation rate is very much higher than the government tries to tell them, and that's why they lose trust in government. But, you know, this whole idea about prices and debasement of currency, if you loan me $100 and in 2 years from now I gave you 90 back, you'd be pretty upset. But we hand back money back that's worth 10 or 15 or 20% less, and nobody seems to be able to do anything about it. It's very upsetting. But it's theft. If I don't give you your full $100 back, if you loan me $100, I'm stealing $10 from you. So somebody's stealing wealth, and this is very upsetting. This ounce of silver back in 2006 would buy over 4 gallons of gasoline. Today it'll buy almost 11 gallons of gasoline. That's preservation of value, and that's what the market has always said should be money. Money comes into effect in a natural way, not in an edict, not by fiat, by governments declaring it is money.
And with more on that, we turn now to former Assistant Secretary to the Treasury under Reagan, better known as the father of Reaganomics, Dr. Paul Craig Roberts. Thanks for joining us, sir.
Pleased to be with you.
And I know there's a lot going on. Economics issues, of course, always up front because they're always downplaying the inflation rate, but we continue to have total economic devastation. What's your outlook on that, sir?
Well, there's no recovery. There can't be because the jobs are offshored. Consumers have no increase in their income to support a growth in consumer demand. They can't borrow anymore because they're too deeply in debt and the banks are too insolvent to lend. And so the economy is just dead in the water and will stay that way for some time. In fact, most likely later this year, it'll drop further.
And so there's fresh reports today. It was linked on the Drudge Report. S&P 500 logs best start to the year since '91. Kind of a hopeful sounding headline. But in this and other coverage, they've definitely indicated that QE3 may finally be officially on the table. I know a lot of people who follow the issue have been saying it's pretty much been going on in a de facto sense anyway. And we were bringing up this issue as well.
Well, it seems to me that it has to be going on in order for the Federal Reserve to keep the interest rates near zero. If they're not buying bonds, one would think that the rate would rise because the inflation is certainly there and all of the interest rates are negative at this time. So when you have a negative interest rate on a 30-year bond, it has to be fixed in some way. The Fed has to be fixing the price. So, you know, they will deny QE3. In fact, isn't that what Bernanke did today? Didn't he say no more stimulus? And so the gold market collapsed. Why does anyone believe him?
And so gold did fall a pretty large number. I didn't see the exact numbers, but maybe they can pull them up on the screen.
Well, it's around $90 right now. It fell 100, which is quite a big drop. And it seems like it's all, you know, once the money managers and the hedge funds got into gold investments, it changed the nature of the market. It's made it more volatile. It drives it up and it also drives it down. So apparently all the money managers and hedge funds sold their gold positions because apparently they believe Bernanke that he's going to leave the economy dead in the water and that we're going to go into an election dead in the water or maybe even with the second down leg of this depression coming into play.
Yes, sir. And so turning to foreign policy issues, you've got the most recent column silencing the critics. You bring up a lot of elements of the attack on the domestic extremists and the FBI's paranoia and all their cooked up cases. And of course, as we continue to march towards war in Syria and Iran and generally in that region, stoking Russia, there's a lot of important stuff going on with the Russian elections. And I guess the larger Washington-based color revolution movement and all their hidden behind the scenes shadow war activity. Yeah. That's a lot of stuff, but take us through what you think is most important, sir.
Well, I think one of the most important things is that the United States, if it proceeds with the Syrian and particularly the Iranian attacks, it shows that it's prepared to be more and more unilateral, because it no longer has the cover of a UN resolution for the attack on Iran. That was vetoed by China and Russia. And it no longer has a coalition of the willing. It's got one British warship and one French warship. So it means that if they do go ahead with an attack on Iran, that Washington is prepared to be very unilateral and to risk a more direct confrontation with Russia and China. Now, the situation in Syria is they're going to attempt to do the same thing they did in Libya. And quite clearly, they're not interested in Syrian democracy, because Assad had the referendum, and the vast majority of the people who voted supported it. And and what they support is the rise of political parties and the prospect of a different party governing Syria than Assad's. And you would think that if Washington really liked democracy, they would get behind this, but no, they denounced it. They denounced it, and they are determined to overthrow Assad. And this also brings more risk of confrontation with Russia, because of the Russian naval base at Tartus. And the Russians quite clearly see that this is an effort on the part of the United States to evict them from the Mediterranean. So as Washington goes forward with these wars, they are risking more and more direct confrontation with nuclear armed powers, Russia and China, neither one of which we would be able to invade or occupy. Or if they can't occupy Baghdad or Fallujah, how are they going to occupy Beijing or Moscow? So it's becoming absurd. It must be hubris and arrogance running very strong in the veins of the Washington policymakers, and it puts us all at risk.
Well, of course, they're interested in democracy the way a duck hunter is interested in using a decoy. But they've not only launched the whole Arab Spring movement and everything going on in the Middle East, but they're using that same democracy wedge to put pressure on Putin and Russia. Let's talk about that issue.
Well, the Russian opposition is, of course, financed by the NGOs that get the money from the National Endowment for Democracy, which many people regard as a CIA front. And it was set up to destabilize America's enemies. So Putin is faced with a disloyal opposition. And the importance of the March elections is it could actually result in protests after the election that could be violent. Putin himself recently said that the Russian police have reason to believe that the opposition may actually kill some prominent person so that Putin can be blamed. And it caused massive